maybe I want to press you on a little bit more about some history of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and this sort of, I don't know, would you call it a Faustian bargain with Pakistan or whatever deal they have with
Sure.
Pakistan? What happened in the months after 9/11 and when American troops had really cornered Al Qaeda fighters in that sort of mountainous Tora Bora region and had bin Laden in its sights?
In the 1980s, starting with Jimmy Carter, but then under Ronald Reagan, America backed the mujahideen, not just the local Afghan fighters against the Soviets and their commie sock puppet dictator there, but foreign fighters from around the Middle East, from America, from Chechnya, from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from everywhere, came to fight to kill the godless commies. And America, Saudi, and Pakistan supported them. Now, in the aftermath of that war, most of the foreign jihadis either went home to go get a job or go to prison, or they went on to fight in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And this is where Al Qaeda's, bones were really made, was fighting in the Balkans with Bill Clinton and the United States on their side. Now, in the early 1990s, the warlords destroyed Afghanistan after the commies were gone. Then it was General Dostum, who had served the Russians,
The Tajik one, yeah.
versus Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Jalaluddin Haqqani and these other warlords. Now, the Taliban actually rose up. Many of them were veterans of the war as well, especially their older members. But many of their younger guys had been too young to have fought in the war. They'd been raised in refugee camps in Pakistan. And so they came really to quell the violence of the warlords who were just tearing the country apart and were notoriously a bunch of disgusting child rapists.
Yes.
So the Taliban came to power. They got their initial start by freeing kidnapped young children from local warlords. And then the word spread that the Taliban is going around freeing kidnapped children from local warlords. So everybody said, hey, free my kids from my warlord too. And then their power kind of, continued to expand across the country, and all with the support of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and the United States of America under William Jefferson Clinton. And the idea was that they wanted the they wanted the Afghan Taliban to conquer the entire country, to completely destroy the Northern Alliance, so that they could build an oil pipeline from Turkmenistan across Afghanistan and across Pakistan, I guess through the mountains, and then to the port of Karachi. And this would be a way to screw the Russians by piping Caspian oil any direction except north through Russia or directly south through Iran. We want to go, they did the BTC pipeline west through from Azerbaijan to Georgia and Turkey to the Mediterranean. And then they wanted to do this pipeline from Turkmenistan across Afghanistan to Pakistan, which the whole thing was crazy. I mean, think about, Afghanistan's the size of Texas. It's absolutely humongous, and it's all wild and bad lands. And there's nothing like the security situation necessary, nor could there be in our lifetimes, the security situation to provide for a pipeline across the entire country like that. But that was the motive at the time. And the whole time during the 1990s, America was playing a double game with these Al Qaeda guys. Some of the CIA is backing them in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. As long as they're killing Serbs and Russians, they're fine. And in fact, they were training the Uyghurs and using them against China as well. At the same time, these same groups had already turned on the United States, and they were attacking American targets here in America, as well as American targets in the Gulf. And just very quickly, they killed Rabbi Kahane in 1990. They blew up a hotel in Yemen in 1992. They blew up the World Trade Center in 1993. They got caught in the Bojinka plot in 1995 with the plot to kill Bill Clinton and the Pope, blow up 12 planes over the Pacific and kamikaze 10 planes into American targets in the United States, the plan that became September 11th. In 96, they bombed the Khobar Towers, which Saudi and the U.S. government blamed on Iranian-backed Shiite Hezbollah, Saudi Hezbollah, which is a bunch of crap, when it was bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who did it. And then they did the Africa embassies in 98, and there was actually a failed attack on the USS The Sullivans with a dinghy before the successful attack of 2000 there. And there's also a question about Flight 800 in 1998, which was shot down off the coast of Long Island, and then but they're floated separate conspiracies about what may have happened, including maybe the Navy shot it down, or maybe it was a bomb planted on board or whatever, when it seems like the most likely explanation was a shoulder-fired rocket. And these would have been probably one given to them by Ronald Reagan back in the days. And all these attacks were happening by the bin Ladenites, essentially Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the bin Laden group that ended up merging into Al-Qaeda all through the 1990s, while our government is still backing them against their enemies in the old world. And so then when the Bush administration comes in, they're so hell-bent on going to Baghdad that they don't want to hear anything about going to Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. They look at that as a big distraction, when the point is, keep your eye on the ball. We want to get Saddam Hussein. What are these bin Ladenites going to do? Set off a truck bomb in Africa somewhere? Who cares, right? As they said at the time, terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. So we get to rule the world and we lose a couple of hundred of natives, at our embassy somewhere overseas. Who cares? Go on ahead. Then after September 11th, they say, okay, now we got to write ourselves a writ to do whatever we want in the world. Of course, first they have to go to Afghanistan. Many people in the cabinet, Rumsfeld particularly, but also his deputy, Paul Wolfowitz, and others were saying we should start bombing Iraq right now. And Bush and Cheney had to tell them, hey, pipe down, enough of the Iraq stuff. We're going to Iraq. But obviously, and Tony Blair of Great Britain insisted, George, obviously we have to go to Afghanistan first, right? Otherwise, people are going to get the wrong idea here, man. So they go to Afghanistan. But then, if you remember back how it was at the time, the assumption was, and the explanation was, that the Taliban is Al-Qaeda is the Taliban. And they did it, and we're going to go get them, and we won't discriminate between the terrorists and the nations who harbor them. Now, the thing of it is, the Taliban were willing to negotiate over Osama bin Laden and his men, but Bush didn't want to negotiate. First, they said, give us some evidence, and we'll turn him over to a Muslim country, and or we'll even hold a trial for him here in Afghanistan ourselves. Bush said, no, forget it. They said, well, give us some evidence, just enough like for an indictment, make us believe you. And we'll turn him over to any Muslim country in the world, which of course could have been Jordan or Malaysia or anywhere where they would have landed the plane on the tarmac and immediately taken off for Virginia again, right?
You're saying Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban at the time, was saying this to the Bush administration. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Then they said, we'll turn him over to the Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis said no, probably at American behest, but I don't know that, but that's my assumption. Then, after the bombs started dropping on October the 8th, they said, okay, we don't need any proof, and we'll turn him over to any third country in the world, except probably Israel, although they didn't even say that. They said, we'll turn him over to any third country in the world, which, of course, there's so many countries in the world that are absolute tight military allies with the United States, where they would have been in absolutely safe hands and would have been extradited to the United States immediately. But the Bush government said, oh, no, we don't want indictments and trials and convictions. This is a war. And so we don't want to have a captive turned over to us. We either want to kill them or nothing. And even then, they weren't so bent on killing them. And we know a lot of this because Bush told his people to just turn over the notes from the National Security Council to the reporter Bob Woodward. Now, Woodward is a bit of a fabulist on some things, but in this case, they just gave him the NSC notes. And he just goes through there and he shows where the National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and the CIA were saying we ought to do everything we can to focus on just killing Arabs. We don't want to kill any locals. And we want to show and impress the Taliban the fact that we're only looking to kill friends of Osama bin Laden, actual foreign fighters here who are on his side. But if you separate yourselves and your regime from him, then you'll have no problem with us. But Donald Rumsfeld at the Pentagon and the others, Dick Cheney and the others, overruled that. And the reason why was because they didn't want to solve the problem quickly. They did not want to make a deal with the Taliban, said, there he is, get him. And then we get him, and then the American people think the war is over. And Donald Rumsfeld said this explicitly in the cabinet meetings. We don't want the American people to think that killing bin Laden is victory. And in fact, if we don't kill him, that's not defeat. And in fact, he proposed maybe we should start bombing Baghdad right now because we want the American people to understand this war is nowhere near over. And it's going to take place over an extended space and an extended period of time. And the last thing in the world they wanted was for a bomb to drop on bin Laden's head and for the American people to say, well, that's what you get for messing with us. You're dead by Christmas time and our boys come home and celebrate and that's it. We don't want that. We want to keep the war going. And just like in the book 1984, they needed to keep that figure of Emmanuel Goldstein, the permanent enemy, out there threatening constantly. If bin Laden was dead, that would have been a huge psychological relief to the American people, that the guy that did it paid the price. Now you're trying to change the subject to a different guy that didn't do it? That wouldn't work nearly as well. And so they let bin Laden go. And I make the case in Fool's Errand and Enough Already that the CIA on the ground and the Delta Force on the ground, they just could not understand why they were denied the resources and the reinforcements they needed and that were available that could have helped them to corner bin Laden. They had him cornered on 3 sides, with the 4th side being the Pakistani border. And then, as I'm sure even, I don't know what's the translation in Hindi, but as I'm sure you must have heard 10 million times yourself, once bin Laden and his friends slipped across the border into Pakistan, it was just like a magic spell, or it was like the Millennium Falcon jumped into hyperspace. And there's nothing we can do about it now, except that you got the Delta Force right there, top tier special operations forces, and they have helicopters. So what the hell do you mean you can't chase them into a friendly nation where they had already picked up the phone and told Pervez Musharraf, remember how your policy was backing the Taliban? Well, now it isn't anymore. Now your policy is doing whatever we say or we'll kill you. And he said, fine. You might remember the phrase was, we'll return your country to the Stone Age if you don't fall right in line, which of course, Pakistan's backing of the Taliban up to that point had not been in contravention of American goals. Now, America had stopped tacitly or participating in that after the Africa embassy bombings of 98. But they had never ordered Musharraf to stop. Musharraf came to power in a coup in, I believe, 97. They never ordered him to stop backing the Taliban that he was in defiance of or anything. So he, of course, flipped right over. And in fact, there's a book by Robert Grenier, who was the CIA station chief in Islamabad. And he said that he had worked directly with the Pakistani Army and Frontier Corps on what we call deconfliction, which is so that we're in constant communication so that when our guys chase the bad guys across the border, your guys don't mistakenly kill our guys thinking they're the bad guys. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So he's saying, we expect the Delta Force to come across the border on Al-Qaeda's heels. And we're going to have deconfliction set up with you to make sure that you don't accidentally shoot our Delta Force.
We saw these reports, the rendition reports, essentially. They are deep rendition sort of operations that happened in that entire NWFP area.
Well, that's a separate thing. Now, the renditions is when they, climb in your window at night and secret you off to a prison camp. At this point, I'm talking about the war. I'm talking about bin Laden on horseback, escaping from the battlefield. And Delta Force is forbidden from chasing him into Pakistan. They could have solved the problem right there. They were not allowed to follow them in. Even, as I'm saying, even though Robert Grenier, the CIA chief, had already worked out deconfliction with the Pakistani military in the expectation that we were going to corner them now and kill them. And they did not do that. They let him escape. He lived until 2011. Now, the reason they did that is so they could tell my mom that Saddam could give his weapons to Osama, and Osama could give them to his men to use against you, lady, in your suburbs. And that was what it was all about, was lying to the American people. Bush would say over and over and over again, imagine September 11th. Except this time, the bin Ladenites armed with Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. They said that over and over for a year and a half to make the American people, one, believe that Saddam Hussein had somehow been responsible for September 11th and or the anthrax attack, and two, that he was going to attack us again. As people would say readily, regurgitating television, they would say, well, are you saying we should just wait around and let Iraq attack us first? Which, of course, the answer is yes. You don't start wars. What are we, the Imperial Japanese? And secondly, this is called begging the question. the logical fallacy where you build your conclusion into your premise. And we're just now pretending that Saddam Hussein is threatening the United States, that he means to attack the United States, that Iraq could be a threat to the United States of America anytime in the next 700 years. Are you kidding me? That's like saying Arkansas is going to attack the United States. No, they're not. That's completely stupid. But so they had to lie, and they lied and they lied and they used fear. These people are going to kill you if you don't let me protect you from them. And they just turned it up to 11, man. It's hard to even replicate. If you think about the propaganda that the Israeli public is inundated with on a daily basis about how the whole world is trying to kill them, that's basically what we were being told at that time. Orange alert, red alert, terror alert, emergency 11. You could die at any moment. Entrapped idiots from the Muslim bookstore paraded on TV in fake terrorism plots. Oh, look, Saddam Hussein, he keeps coming with the terrorism plots against us, and just driving up this fever pitch on AM radio news. If you drive for a living, you listen to AM radio news at the top of the hour, and they would say, Al-Qaeda has a terrorist plot to bomb a bank somewhere in New York or New Jersey. Oh, that's really useful. And so they call out all the SWAT teams and all the National Guard and everybody to stand around at every bank branch in New York and New Jersey. Yeah, right. You see, this is just theater. They, at one time, I'll never forget, I know where I was driving when I heard them say, Al-Qaeda, Intel CIA has uncovered an Al-Qaeda plot to attack a school somewhere in Texas, that they were just trying to scare the hell out of everybody's mom and dad to let them do this in Iraq. And that's the answer of why they even did the regime change in Kabul, why they even conflated the Taliban with Al-Qaeda, and why they said we have to overthrow the government in Kabul, we have to install the Northern Alliance in power, and we have to build them a democracy and a Westphalian nation state. Bring them into the 21st century and all of this stuff. You know, unlike Texas, which West Texas is pretty desertous, but in, you know, the eastern half of the state, at least, there's a lot of water and forests and natural resources everywhere. Afghanistan is just badlands, right? They got deserts like California. They got mountains like Colorado, right? And extreme temperatures of all kinds. Barely any arable farmland. And what there is completely dominated by poppy crops ever since the 1980s war destroyed any other agriculture in the country. So, and the people are, you know, at least, let's say, in a completely alien society to ours. It's a warrior culture of people who like to fight and are no more likely to accept a foreign occupation for the long term than Texans would be. And in fact, maybe even less likely than that. And so, and this is why they never really devoted full-scale resources to the thing, is because they knew it was never going to work. The whole point of the war was just to extend it, to keep it going, to not be the one in charge when the thing finally fell apart on their own watch. And that's not to say, by the way, that, oh, if only they had devoted more resources, it would have worked. A lot of people do say that. They say, oh, no, yeah, if we hadn't diverted our resources to Iraq, then Afghanistan would have gone much better. No, it would have gone much worse, much faster. Because the more we escalated that war, the worse it got in every way. Our troops show up out in the countryside where they had not been before. Now they have a whole new group of enemies who were not their enemies before. And so that was the way that whole war worked. So it's wrong to say that diverting the resources away cost the war effort. That's not right, and that's not what I mean. But what I do mean to say is just look at the effort that they put in, right? 50,000 troops, mostly. They had 50,000 or fewer troops in the whole country doing, you know, pinprick night raid strikes against alleged bad guys. But in no way were they able to, you know, even really rally an enemy force to fight and destroy, right? It was just a local insurgency of midnight fighters, right? Men who farm in the daytime and fight at night.